Welcome to Geopod, where we discuss current events through the lens of geospatial analysis. My name is Andrew Patterson. I'm an educator here at Coppell High School. Who else we got around the table today?
I'm Bhargav, student.
I'm Sathvik.
I'm Bilal.
And I'm Nihar.
So where are we on this issue, education in this country? How can we make some changes? What is keeping us from really thinking critically? What do you guys think?
Just to recap, we've mainly focused on the problems of our education system, and we focused a lot on our experiences at Coppell High School, and then we sort of broadened it out to the world. So yes, today we want to talk about more solution-based methods of fixing our education system and maybe tying in geography. So one thing, as Mr. Patterson mentioned, and as we mentioned last week, and we targeted heavily, was the fact of school being a memorized-based learning, where you're spewed out facts in either textbooks or Quizlets or whatever, and all you're doing is memorizing for a specific test and then throwing it out the window. What I think needs to be done, if we talk about specifically at Coppell High School, is some method of learning where it's not memorized-based, where it's application-based in a structured way. Application-based not meaning of go make a random video somewhere and somehow tie it in, but for example, one of our teachers, Mr. Dixon, every morning we would start off the day with looking at world news today. And then, a lot of times we'd be like, what are we learning about? We're just reading about something that's happening in Iraq or Syria or just some random news that you think wouldn't even relate to it. And somehow he would relate it back to world history. So not only do I think, especially in today's world where, the media is covering everything and everyone wants to know what's either happening in politics or what's happening in the news, somehow, if teachers were able to tie in what's going on today with their learning, and this can even be done in science classes, it doesn't have to be social studies. If they find a method of tying in stuff that's going on in the world with what you're actually learning, not only will it be more interesting, but it will be more relevant and applicable for the future. Bhargav, any thoughts?
I think another problem with the education system is that we're too focused on our grades itself and not the content material. So we do a bunch of stupid projects that don't do anything to advance your learning, but are for the sake of making it seem like you have the knowledge fully assessed and that you understand the topics presented to you. But in actuality, you're cramming information for tests. You're just putting a bunch of random information you found onto projects, and you're not really comprehensively understanding it yourself. And so that's why we're doing so bad nationally, because we're just focused on grades. The U.S., according to Pearson, we rank 14th in the world in terms of education. I think that's because we're not doing the best we can do to apply our learning to our world around us and to apply our learning to ourselves.
You make a good point about the useless projects, and I'm going to tie it back into experiences I had all the way back in elementary school. There was a program called Challenge, which turned into the GT program, which is, in our school, it's sort of a gifted and talented program where they put some individuals in this GT program and they have their own special class. I mean, you learn the same content, but back in elementary school, there was a fine distinction between what was going on in Challenge and what was going on in normal classes. And what you did in Challenge was a lot of random things, but now when I look back at it, I realize how useful those things were. So, for example, while we were learning, about different maths and sciences in our classes, while in Challenge, we were doing things like logic puzzles, and we were doing things like stories with holes where you have to fill in information. Now, I'm not saying now that you're in high school that you need to go do stories with holes or logic puzzles, that you can do that on your own leisure time, or that may be too of an elementary thing to do. But that sort of interesting and creative ways of learning, I think, is lacking a lot, not only in Coppell High School, but in America as a whole. Because it's just so textbooked and heavy learning-based courses, you miss out on that interesting materials and creativity that I found when I was in elementary school. Sathvik, you want to talk about your experiences?
So Bilal, you talked about something interesting. Well, that's what I think the education system needs to take into a huge factor. What is the first thing we think about when we go to school? I know half the people sitting here just think about grades, right? What the school needs to do is take away that fear of grades and take away that restriction of doing well just because I have to, and add in creativity. The school needs to provide more activities that make courses and classes seem more interesting to the student. For example, being a doctor. Half the kids, if I here at Coppell High School, ask them, dude, do you want to go to medical school? And he's just like, yeah, because I'm in it for bank. I'm like, okay, but is the entire medical profession just about getting money? No, it's about helping people. It's about providing your service and spending your time and resources to help other people. So In my opinion, the education system needs to change the amount of creativity present in like its courses or in its system. For example, for chemistry, we learned about acids and bases and dissociation constants. Sure, we did a lab and did a lab report over that and had a test over that, but I really wanted to just see, a really cool demonstration of an acid neutralizing with a base and learning about how an ionization constant just comes into factor. If we can do something like that and put in more interesting activities just to make creativity spark, then I think that education system wouldn't be flawed at all.
Yeah, you guys have hit on two of the big issues that I see within the educational system as an educator. Number one, Bhargav, I think you hit on that we're getting lots of information crammed into our brains and we're not able to ask critical thinking questions because we're so concerned about memorizing the information. I think it happens within one class, like we have so much information piled in, but I think it happens across the board, going through the whole process of becoming educated in our system in K through 12. We have lots of information we have to memorize, and we don't really get to ask those questions about why. And I think that's a huge problem because when we don't get to ask why, we don't get to think about issues in the world and we don't get to make changes. But the other one was we're finding that it's not applicable to the real world. Like we're just memorizing data and pointers that other people have deemed necessary. But if we can't transfer it to the real world, then we're not going to be able to make that connection in our brain that helps us remember it longer than just for what we need to succeed on a test. In our classroom, I think that we've come up with some creative strategies to address those. Like, for example, when people are so concerned about grades, one of the things that we do is we try to balance it out. In my position, I have to prepare students to be ready for the AP exam. That is multiple choice tests and written essays or free response questions. So what I do is I balance out the grades so they're not so afraid of a multiple choice test. They're not so worried that they're going to go out and cheat. We still have that issue, but we're going to balance that out with some other projects that will help minimize the risk for failing on one multiple choice test. But the other way is I have the information that we have to get in with AP Human Geography, but I also try to do that in an efficient manner to where we can ask questions like why. So at the root base level, a way we can start to change the system is through educators recognizing that we do have these issues going on and trying to address them in their individual class.
You brought up a really good point, Mr. Patterson, about not being able to be prepared for the real world. And, while I was listening to you, I realized something that could be very helpful to students if there was a method to have a more real-world-based learning. What I mean by that is in classes, you're just reading the textbook and you're just learning facts and you're like, why do I need to do this? If they got the experiences to say, if you're in a biology class or you're doing labs, what if, you got to visit a doctor's office in school? Or what if you got to go to a real biology lab and get to witness what these people do? And then they can show you, how they use what you're learning in school in real life. So what if you go out, take an AP Hug class and go to your local area and look how these urban patterns are actually occurring? Or how, migration and immigration are affecting our city in a whole. I think that a more real-world-based system where you tie in different aspects of society and actually show people, why are we learning this? What can I do with this in the future? All these different things of tying it into the real world, I think, is lacking. I know, of course, the budget and everything would be impossible to just go take out students everywhere, but if there was some way to show kids why you're learning something and how does it apply to the real world, kids would do a lot better in school because they'd realize, I'm working towards something because I've seen that it actually works in the real world. Patterson, do you have any thoughts?
I mean, you're absolutely right. On the one hand, as an educator, I am extremely limited because I've got to get information into my kids' brains to score high on a test because I want to reflect that we know what we're doing. And right now, that's scoring high on an AP exam. For me to take the time to take my class downtown to Dallas to study urban growth, that's amazing. But as an educator, I'm also really limited because I got to get them the information to pass a test. So that's one of my frustrations. So you're absolutely right. We've got to move somehow and make that change. But the other thing is, when we do see programs and educators doing things like project-based learning, we do start to see that real-world application, and that is used to a certain extent here at Coppell High School with success. Like you think about the STEM program where you've got Mr. Yakubowski who has kids build the solar car, and they're going out and they're getting grants. They're speaking with executives of companies to fund their operations. These are real-world applications, and they're learning by taking action, and I think that's phenomenal. So we are doing some of that. But you're right, across the board, we're weak in that subject.
Just a simple example. Freshman year in AP Human Geography, we had a project where we had to create a commercial. And my partner Nihar and I, we were like, what do we want to do? What do we want to make a commercial of? And then I just realized right outside my backyard is a Caterpillar vehicle. And I realized, and Caterpillar is something that people would think, why do I need to learn about this? Well, because it's right next door. It's something that in the future you're probably going to use. And so projects like that where you're going out into the real world and you're either looking for things or you're trying to understand something, when you do real world projects, you take information you're learning from school and saying, this actually matters because it's actually going on in the real world. Nihar, you have any thoughts?
I think the real-world application problem is actually not that much of an issue, especially in Coppell and good schools, because I know, like Mr. Patterson said, the STEM program exposes students to engineering and technology, but the reason a lot of people choose not to do this is because of the GPA factor. It all comes down to grades. You can see people taking AP classes that they don't even want to take just because they want to get ranked and get into a good college, hopefully get a good job. Going back to what Sathvik said about medicine, the Plano Independent School District actually has a program where students go out and do clinical rotations in nearby hospitals, but the reason a lot of people don't do them is because they're worth the lowest GPA level, which pretty much ruins your chances of getting ranked or getting a high GPA.
So, Mr. Patterson, you talked about your role as an educator, and yeah, that has a huge factor in like what we're actually doing in a yearly basis. Sure, going for projects outside would invoke interest, but what really matters, in my opinion, is that when we do projects and application projects, right, students will be starting to think that, sure, yes, this can be applicable, and this really does matter. I'm not going to just do it for the grade. Because of that interest, they'll start to like read about it more, participate more in class. Students that were shy once before would be opening up and their grades would just improve. And then Mr. Patterson's job as an educator would be fulfilled because they'll do really well in the exam.
So tying back to what Patterson and Sathvik said, I think there's no better way to learn than through experience. There's no better way to assess that you're learning knowledge through showing that knowledge at work. So I think that in order to have students be able to effectively go into the real world and test their skills, the curriculum needs to be amended to reflect that the test score is not the most important item. The knowledge is. And so if like our curriculum is based around us learning and us applying our knowledge to the real world rather than getting a high score on a test created by a bunch of people we don't know, then I think our learning as a nation as a whole would be better.
All right, so we've been talking a lot about education here in the U.S. and here specifically at Coppell, but, and efforts are being made to change and the system is gradually improving. But let's just talk about how it is in like different areas of the world. In 7th and 8th grade, I studied in India for 2 years in an international school. We only had 4 tests through the entire year. Unit test 1, midterm 1, unit test 2, and midterm 2. And that was it. Your performance in class did not matter at all. The teachers would not teach a single thing that is outside the textbook. So basically, your teachers are just robots that read the textbook, and you have to like answer questions based on that. There was no application, so basically we were bored to death. The only thing that kept us alive, like in terms of enjoyment, was we played soccer. And see, these 4 tests, when you take them, your entire grade would reflect on it. So a midterm 1 would be 50 points, and the midterm 2 would be 50 points, so that's out of 100. And then the unit test 1 and 2 would be out of 25. Whatever you got, that's it. You're stuck with that score, and then you ride your international, or they say international, but again, Indian board exams, and whatever grade you get on that, you get placed in a college. So basically, different colleges in India, they don't even care about students and like their performance on the test. They just wanted them to be really nationally like high ranked, and that's all that matters. So there's no concept of like application. There's no concept of liking education. It's just doing it to get the best spot possible in India.
I'm going to wrap it up here. We've been talking a lot about reform, but it's not going to come overnight. Changes in the education system not only take people discussing it as we're doing today, but people taking action. And it also is a mindset. This whole thing we've been talking about students driven by GPA or by reading the textbook and getting into college. And this whole idea, especially I see here in Texas or in the United States, of a holistic student. A student who has to be high ranked, has to be in 5 extracurricular activities, has to be volunteering every weekend, has to be doing this just for the college application is wrong. There's a difference between a student trying to get into a college and a student trying to drive his life forward. focusing on certain things he's passionate about, not caring